Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Change the World, What's Truly Possible When You Think Like a Startup. This program is proudly sponsored by P&G Ventures, Kroger, First Financial, North American Properties, Vora Ventures, and Taft. Today's webinar will have a Q&A session after the presentation portion. Please continue to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. A recorded version of today's webinar will be provided a few days after this event, and the usual survey will be provided after this event as well, so please don't forget to fill it out on your way out. Thank you all so much for attending. I will hand it off to Tarek to get us started.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, great. So thanks for joining. I wanted to share a little bit about my story. I've been an entrepreneur for 20-something years, and I've learned a lot during that time, multiple businesses. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. And I'm going to share, I think, the skills that you really need to be successful, both as an entrepreneur, but also really in anything that you're going to pursue. And then I want to talk about what the definition of an entrepreneur is to me. And it's more than just, writing code or building a business. I think there's lots of skills that entrepreneurs share with anyone that's changed the world. And so I want to draw that correlation for you and then spend some time answering any questions that you might have. So hopefully that's how we'll spend our time together. And again, thanks to all the sponsors that have put this together. So Centrifuge, I'm sure you're aware, is a collaboration of a lot of Cincinnati and the region's biggest companies to drive innovation and economic development around innovation. So thanks again to these companies for putting all that together and making this possible. Okay, so with that out of the way, thanks again for your time. So my story really starts around your age. So if this audience is comprised of high school and college age students, my story really started after my junior year of college. And what had happened was I was pre-med for 3 years. And for as long as I can remember, my parents had told me that I was going to be a doctor. And I hated all of the pre-med classes, the chemistry classes, the biology classes that I was taking. And so after junior year, you really have to make a decision. Are you going to go to medical school or not? And it is a long road once you decide that's the road you're going to get on, and there's really not an exit. So at that point, I decided that's not what I really love, and I can't imagine doing that for the rest of my life. And so I went back to my parents and I told them that I don't want to do that. It was the first time in my life where I really started to make decisions about what I found interesting versus what were safe decisions. What decisions made the most money? What job has the lowest chance of getting laid off? And when I started changing my thinking, and I stopped thinking about safety and security, and I really started thinking about what makes me happy, my life really changed in a very dramatic way. And so that's what I want to share. And so for me, this is actually my first computer. I know I'm old, I get it. I date myself with this picture, but this is probably the age of 12. And I had taken a 1-week camp class, so maybe going into middle school, and they offer this thing about learning to code for middle schoolers. And so I took it and spent a week there, and I fell in love with it. Wow, this thing is cool. And you can think of anything, and then you can tell the computer how to make it happen. And so I started at a very young age, and the internet didn't exist. So for me, it was a lot of self-learning. So you give yourself a project and you want to go figure out, how do you make that thing come to life? And that is a common thread that you're going to hear from me for the next 25 minutes, is how do you see something and then make it come to life? Now, you're going to think and hear a lot about that in terms of business, but I think there's another correlation there when it comes to changing the world. And so for me, that beginning, when I really, after my junior year, started to think about what do I love to do, it was this. It was building things. It was writing code. It was solving problems. It was math. That's what I really love to do. And so what happened then is I took that and I started my first company. So I worked at a big company for 5 or 6 years, and then I left there. And I was making great money writing software. And I left there because I always wanted to, at some point, start a business. That was something that meant a lot to me. And my concern was that I was going to get too comfortable, right? You're working at a big job and you make lots of money, and then you buy a car and a house and married and kids and all of that. How are you ever going to be in a position to quit and kind of chase something that you're passionate about? So I wanted to start leading my life in a way where I don't have any regret. I don't want to get to the end and say, I wish I would have, because that's terrible. Even if you fail, that's fine, because at least you know you tried and you can live with that. But to never even try, that is the worst. And so what happened was I started my first company. We were doing custom software, working for big companies in the area, and that was great. It was very up and down because you're very busy or you're waiting for your next projects to come in. And so while I was doing that, I started another company, and it wasn't even really intended to be a company. It was around sports and what would happen if, let's say, the 1976 Reds played the 1927 Yankees. And it's all math. What would have happened if those two teams would have played? And so I started this as a side project, and that thing really took off, and it led me to doing deals first with Major League Baseball, then the NHL, NBA, ESPN, Fox. It really exploded. And it made me feel good about these decisions. I was doing things not for money, but because I thought they were interesting and because I thought this is something I really want to spend my time on. And when I tell people kind of that feeling, hopefully you can relate to this, but have you ever been working on something and the next thing you know, 5 hours have passed and it feels like 5 minutes? Where you're so into it. It could be you're working on a project or you're reading a book or whatever, but you're really into it and time just goes so fast. And that's what it should feel like. When you find something that you are made for, it feels like you're not working at all. It feels like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And you cannot believe time is moving so quickly. And I ran into, we shared an office complex with a bunch of other companies, and I would run into people in the hallway and I'd say, hey, how's your week going? And almost all of them were, oh, I can't believe it's already, or it's only Wednesday, right? For them, time is going so slow. Or if you've been in a class that you hate and it feels like the clock is not moving, well, that, you know you're doing the wrong thing. You shouldn't be doing that job. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. So whenever I would hear from someone, I can't believe it's only Wednesday, my reaction was, I can't believe it's already Wednesday. It's going so fast. I cannot wait to get to the office. I can't sleep Sunday night because I'm so excited about what I'm doing. So it gives you some insight into what life should feel like when you know you're doing the right thing. And so for me, it led to all these great opportunities, and we ended up getting acquired. That business was acquired by Fox a while ago. And if you watch any of the Fox telecasts and you see things like, our prediction has the Bengals beating the Steelers 27-21. Well, all of that was coming from all the work that we had done. predicting sports outcomes. And so that was kind of cool to see something you had an idea and then you brought it to life, and now you see other people embrace it. Super cool. And then after that, I worked with a basketball. We built a IoT basketball, and this is years ago, that had sensors inside that would measure what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong with the basketball. Really help you get better as a player, because it can see things a coach could never see, and it gives you real data. So it can tell you that your dribbling with your left hand is 16% worse than with your right hand, and here's what you need to do to improve. So it's a coach within the ball, which was pretty cool. And so we got that into every Apple store in North America. And so again, to have an idea and then bring it to life and then see people embrace it like Apple is just awesome. And it makes you feel good. And again, it's not for the money. That is not why you do it. It is for, I see something and now I need to figure out how to bring it to life. And then that brings me to the current business, which is Circle. And Circle, again, was not intended to be a business. It was the idea of how are we, or why are we sending the same communication to everyone? So if you think about your school today and how they communicate to you, why are they sending the same thing to all students? That doesn't make sense. What if I don't care about that topic? Why don't we communicate to people like Netflix already communicates to you, or Amazon or Spotify? They make you feel like you're the only fill in the blank. Subscriber, shopper, viewer, listener, everything makes you feel like you're the only one that they have. And so the idea behind Circle was, why can't we do that for all communication? Again, not intended to be a business. It's just, I feel like it would make the world a better place. And so that's what I'm working on now. But there's a common thread here, which is I see things that should exist and don't. And then how do you bring them to life? And so from that, I've spent a lot of time really learning about startups and what works and what doesn't work, and then the type of mentality it takes to be successful. And so some of those things, you know, we've talked about. So this idea about starting a business to make money. You would be insane to start a business to make money, because the odds of you, having one of these big paydays where someone comes in and acquires your business or your company goes public is tiny, almost a rounding error. Chances that would ever happen to you. If your primary motivation is to make money, you should go work at a big company, because they pay really, really well and you'll do well there if that's your primary motivator. So I get tired of kind of seeing on social media this whole romanticized notion that the idea is, oh, I have this really genius idea. I go out and I raise a bunch of money. I build this killer app or product or whatever. And very quickly, shortly after there, I get acquired for a huge amount of money and I'm super rich. That just does not happen that way. I don't know why that's the perception out there, but I'm telling you, I've never seen it happen that way, not once. So get away from the idea of starting something to make money. You really want to get into the idea of starting something because you see the world differently than it exists today. I want to talk about now 2 different ways to make that happen. So my own personal experience is with technology. So I love technology. This was what I learned at a very young age. At the age of 12, I learned this. I could see something and then I would spend hours. I would spend hours and hours and hours thinking about how do you bring this thing to life. And then you'd run into little problems here and little problems there, and your code's not working, or it's not working the way you thought it was going to work. And you're constantly solving problems. But you've got this idea that you're working towards. And that idea is only limited by your imagination. This is technology. You can do anything. And as I really thought through, why is this limited to technology? So if you talk about high level, if you say, and believe me when I say entrepreneurs see the world in a different way. So they see something that should exist and doesn't, and then they work to bring that thing to life. Okay, now most people have that associated with business. Oh, I've got this great business idea, and then you work 80 hours a week to bring it to life. Got it. And you're solving all kinds of problems. But that's not just limited to business. It really isn't. If you think about these people, they are entrepreneurs. Think about the definition that I just gave you. They see the world in a different way. They see something that should exist but doesn't, whether it's gender equality, whether it is racial equality, whether it is social justice. They see this thing that should exist and it doesn't, and it keeps them awake. And they're thinking about all of the problems they have to overcome to make this happen. They are way more of an entrepreneur than I could ever be, right? The impact that they're making is global in scale, but they are still entrepreneurs. So we have a very, I think, narrow definition of what is an entrepreneur, and people have tied it to building a business. I would say it's much broader than that. It is changing the world. How are you going to change the world? These people all change the world. I did, but on a much smaller scale than what they are doing. And so did I build things that, brought joy to people? Yes. And did I make some basketball players better? Yes. And did I make sports broadcasts maybe a little more entertaining? I hope so. We're entrepreneurs, they're entrepreneurs, but I don't want you to think about it so narrowly. I don't want you to think, oh, I can't code, I can't change the world. I'm like, that's not true. As far as I know, none of those people that you're looking at could code, and they had a much bigger impact on our world than I could ever have. So I want you to think about kind of broadly, what's the world that you see? And then how do you bring it to life? And so when I thought then, take the next step, what are the skills you really need to keep going? So we already talked about your motivation. It should not be for money. It should be because I see the world in a different way. And these 5 things are broad buckets that I would say, if that's you, you can do anything. You can change the world, whether it's through technology or socially. Are you passionate, really passionate about the world being that way? Are you creative? Because it is not simple to do what any of those people have done. To build a business that didn't exist is really difficult. To change the world for social equality, gender equality, racial equality, all of it, even more difficult. So you've got to be creative when you run into problems. I can't just go in a straight line. You've got to be super creative. You've got to be thinking about it all the time. And these things are tied together. If you're not passionate about it, you're not going to have these light bulb moments where you run into a problem, but you're thinking about it so much that you see a solution nobody ever saw before. And that ties into problem solving. If you don't love to solve problems, it tires you out, it's exhausting. You're really going to not like entrepreneurship, because all you're doing is solving problems. There isn't a book on Amazon that's going to tell you exactly what to do to be successful. If you think about kind of the educational system, and this is where I wish it would change, is a lot of it is focused on, here's how you get an A. You got to do these 10 things. Here's the rubric you need to do well in my class. But that's not real. That is not the real world. They're teaching you how to work, but they're not really teaching you how to solve problems. And to be an entrepreneur, you have to love solving problems. And let me give you some examples. So if you were, I don't know, to start a business, you've got problems right out of the gate. So you've got problems around, what should I call it? Is that domain name available? What about all the social channels? What about trademark issues? You haven't even started yet. All right, who's going to deny my logo? How much should I pay them? When do I get an office? How much do I pay for rent? Where should it be located? How do I hire people? This, you haven't even started addressing your actual issue. This is what entrepreneurs do. And if you like that, if you like playing games, puzzles, like constantly thinking through things, you will love entrepreneurship because that is all you do. That leads into persistence, which is, I'm not going to give up. This is so important to me that even when people say no, and no, and no, and no, I don't care. The reason they're saying no is because they don't see what I see in the world. You think about whether it's someone starting a business or someone trying to change the world socially, right? Martin Luther King ran into unbelievable resistance, but he never gave up because in his mind, that is the way the world should look, and I'm not going to give up. And it's the same thing, whether you're starting a business or trying to change the world, you're going to run into tremendous resistance. You're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. And so if you cave, if you need to hear people say, oh my God, that's the greatest idea I've ever seen, you're not going to hear that. You're going to hear, why would we do this? I don't get it. I don't understand what you're trying to do. And you need to keep thinking, going back of how do I bring this thing to life? And that ties into the very last point, which is empathy. And I don't think our school systems do a good job of teaching empathy. So empathy is, I can feel what you feel. And I can understand the other person's point of view. And whether you're building a business, so if I'm creating an app or writing a piece of software or marketing, doesn't really matter. You have to be able to put yourself in your prospect's shoes if you're marketing. How will they react to the words that we're using? How will this make them feel? Is this what we want them to feel? If I was building a piece of software, is this something I would want to use 8 hours a day? If not, you don't have empathy. You don't understand what the other person is feeling. So that's really important. And all those things together collectively, I think, are the skills that you need to be successful at entrepreneurship. And I'm using it in the broadest sense of the term. So a good exercise for you is to go through and rate yourself. You know, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in those 5 buckets? Where do you need the most work? Is it problem solving? All right, you give yourself the, maybe I'm a 3 in problem solving. Awesome, that's fine. How do you work on that skill? What classes can you take now that you have the opportunity to address these issues? So you now have an opportunity to really assess yourself and say, if I'm being totally honest with myself, I'm not that creative. All right, maybe your electives should be around art. Maybe if I'm being totally honest, I'm not good at problem solving. And as much as it probably pains you to say, hear this, you should be taking math classes. Because I hear this all the time from my own kids. I don't understand why I need to know this. You know, going through math homework or whatever, is not the point. The point is they are teaching your brain to think in a way where you can solve problems. So if that's an issue for you, then take those classes. Don't worry about your grade, worry about it helping you be a better problem solver. If you don't even know what you're passionate about, Maybe your electives should be around trying things and taking classes that, "Oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I don't know enough about that. I want to try it." Think of your educational experience as a buffet with 10,000 plates, right? There's so many different classes that you can take, clubs that you can join, organizations that you can be a part of. Do it. Why would you not? People get on a race, right? That you get on this conveyor belt and you're on a race and get through school. And they're missing the most important part of that journey, which is learning. What do you like and what don't you like? So if I'm asking you and I'm showing you right now, what are you passionate about? And you can't even answer the question, then you know you should spend your time in school exploring different things. Open yourself up. Join clubs. I'm not saying you have to be involved with it for 4 years. I'm saying try it. Oh, I didn't know this is actually way cooler than I thought. Try it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to go back. Try as many different things as you can while you have this opportunity. So you can address all of these in very different and creative ways, because if you really are focused on, I want to change the world, then you have to have these skills. All right, so that kind of brings me to the end. And I think we've got some questions popping up. So let me jump over there. And all right, so I'm just going to read these. And if you have any other questions, hopefully you've stayed awake, so thanks for that. But if you have any other questions, feel free to fire them here. If you want to stay connected with me, that's me on Twitter. So you can DM me questions. I try to be really responsive. And I'm also on LinkedIn. And I would say if you haven't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do that. I always tell this to students and they're like, yes, I'm going to do that. And they never do. Like, you are wasting an opportunity to tap into my network. Oh, you want to meet people at Fox or ESPN or whatever? Great, I'm happy to introduce you. But they won't. I don't know why. It's a free, easy thing to do. You should all connect with me on LinkedIn. And then if you got any questions, you can ask me there, or you can ask me on the Twitter. All right, so I've got a question from Noah Zender. Is passion, creativity, problem solving, persistence, and empathy skills that can be learned, worked on, and fine-tuned? If so, what ways have you found to cultivate these skills and make them better? Yes. So yes, definitely. I think I addressed a lot of that, where it starts with just do an honest self-assessment. Really rank yourself, a scale of 1 to 10 or a scale of whatever, and you'll see where you need the most work. And then you can be creative around, well, how do I address that? And it might mean doing some things that you thought, I don't want to take a math class as an elective. I hear you. But if you want to be good at problem solving, it will teach you how to think in that way. And don't go into that math class with, why am I learning this? You now know why you are there. You are there because it's going to help your brain think and see problems differently. So yes, I absolutely believe you can improve all of those skills. Zand asks, who is the jersey behind you and what's the story? So I've got a bunch of jerseys. This is just a couple. So I have Larry Bird. So these are all autographed, and Magic and Dr. J and Willie Mays, and way over there is Barry Sanders. So this comes from kind of my sports business, where these were all hanging up in our office. I've probably got 20 or 30 more in the basement that I have nowhere to put them. But I grew up a big sports fan, and kind of my first big business was around sports. So I just kind of keep these around me to remind me, like, yeah, that's kind of where I came from. Plus, I think they're kind of cool. So hopefully that answers that question. What should students primarily focus on with their pitch competition preparation? So Zand is asking that. I focus on picking something that you're passionate about, number one, because you're going to see it differently than picking something just because you have to, and driving value. So one of the things that I think really successful businesses do well is they think about driving value. What I mean by that is they're not thinking money first. They're thinking value first. How can I create so much value that people need this thing in their life? When you start reframing what you're doing and what you're working on in terms of creating value versus just making money, it's a very different type of business. And so if it were me and I was preparing to do a business plan competition, I'm thinking about all the big things, but I'm first thinking about something I'm really passionate about, because that shines through when you present. Right? I can tell if I'm judging a business plan competition, you were either assigned this or you really love it, or you just joined a team and somebody else really loves it, but you don't love it. You can tell. And so start with something that you really love, and then think about, what does the world look like? How could it be? How are you going to get there? And what's all the value that you can create all along that process? So those are the big things I would recommend for any business plan competition. Be prepared, I guess, would be the other one. So if the judges ask you questions and you haven't thought through that, that's a problem, right? And investors would treat you the same way. They want to feel as though you've really thought through this. And if you don't know the answer, the best response I can give you is, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question. I will find out. I don't have the answer, but I will find out. So be prepared as best you can. And if you don't know, it's okay. You can be honest and say, I don't know. I've never heard that question. Didn't think about that, but I will find out and I will get back to you. So those would be my tips for business plan competitions. So let's see here. I answered that. Let's see here. So I have one from Tucker O'Neill. How do the opportunity to work with such large-scale companies affect your vision and goal to help people and change the world? That's a great question. I'm not sure that big companies are who you should aspire to be, is the honest answer. I think what happens is you have people that have a vision and they start a business, and they're used to taking risks, they're used to moving fast, they're used to creating value, or they're probably not going to be successful. And then what happens is the people that had that original vision, they started that business, they leave, right? They get old, or they move on to do something else, or whatever. And then you bring in people that don't understand the DNA of that business. They don't understand how they got to be where they are. And they start thinking very short term. If you haven't already, I would highly suggest you subscribe to a podcast called How I Built This on NPR. It's amazing. They're, 40, 45 minutes long, maybe an hour max, but they're just interviewing the founders. And it really gives you insight into how these people think. You're going to hear common traits between them. And you're going to hear what happens when they're out. I remember the Panera Bread guy saying, yeah, Panera is doing great and whatever, and so I chose to retire. And as soon as he did, they bring someone in that doesn't think big picture. They think very short term. You just can't do anything meaningful in 3 months. And that's how businesses and financial analysts think. It's every quarter. What are you doing for me? And he says it in his interview. It's like, I'm watching this and I know we're going down the wrong path. And I can see it happening because they want results every 3 months. But how are you going to really impart change in such a short amount of time? People become very risk averse. And so the DNA of what started the company and what led to their success changes. And so, back to the original question, I think working with big companies taught me what I don't want to be. I don't want to be in a state where I'm thinking very short term. I'm thinking about money. I'm thinking about titles and who reports to who and how many people report to you. That's what matters in big companies. In small companies, none of that matters. It is all about, let's move as fast as we can, we're going to innovate, and we're going to create tremendous amounts of value. So I'm not saying big companies are bad, and there's a lot of big companies that do things differently. I think Google probably is a good example of that. Cisco is a good example of that. And they're massive companies with 50, 100,000 employees, and they still have that DNA. But if you think about it, at Google, the founders are still involved. Facebook, the founders are still involved. Twitter, they're still there. What happens is when they leave, what happens to the DNA? So a lot of big companies I've worked with, the founders are gone. And so it's taught me, I don't want to be there. I know the 5 things that I showed earlier, those skills, that really is what matters. And those things get pushed away when a company gets too big and you get new leadership. Great question. Let's see, so I've got one from anonymous attendee. What is your advice on tackling common problems that everyone is trying to solve in a unique way? I probably want some more detail on that question. Without detail, I can just kind of give you a broad answer. I really don't care what other people are doing. I really think about, again, it starts with the vision of how should the world be? And then you can work backwards to figure out how to get from point A to point B. I try to stay away from what are other people doing unless it's an opportunity for us to collaborate, to a common mission. So hopefully that answered, but if not, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn or ask another question. Let's see, who do you admire most and why? So I'll start with probably my mom and dad for what they did. So they came here when I was 3 from Egypt, so they immigrated. They came to a country where they really didn't even speak the language, and they did it because they wanted more opportunity. So from a kind of personal perspective, it's like, that's amazing. I can't imagine at the age of whatever they were, 27, leaving with a 3-year-old to go to a country where you barely speak the language and don't know anyone, and doing it because you want a better life for your children. That is really impressive to me. So definitely them. And then I think Elon Musk is someone I really admire because he exemplifies the world should be this way. And he is relentless with making it happen. And, the beginning of Tesla was a nightmare. They had so many problems, and the Roadster wasn't really that great. The technology wasn't ready. They were a week away from going bankrupt. And he figured out how to make it happen. And not only happen, he had this vision, and now he's delivering. And their cars are amazing, and the engineering and the thought and the detail, because he did something and he was very disruptive to how things have always been done, because in his mind, he said, this should exist. We should have all electric cars that people want to own and drive. and he made it happen. And he continues to do that. He doesn't really care what other people think. And that's another good point, is that if you are, I think it goes back to this persistence skill. If you really are concerned about what other people think of you, you're not going to be a good entrepreneur, because people can't see what you see. You might have the vision, but then you can't execute because everybody's telling you, no, that's a terrible idea. And you believe them and you give up. And so the idea then with persistence, and Elon Musk again, doesn't really matter. You just, I'm sorry, you can't see what I see, and that's too bad, but I'm going to make it happen regardless. So he would be another person that I would say, yeah, that's a great example of a business entrepreneur. So I got a question here. When you're making a business, you focus on value over profit. So how do you handle a lack of security in your job and finances? Do you hold a second job, or do you know that all the effort you're putting into your passion will have a return in value eventually? No, you do not know. There's nothing guaranteed. And so it isn't that you know you're going to be successful. It is that I almost don't care. I hope I'm successful, but I can't live with the idea of not trying this. I can't live with the regret of not trying this. I really want to pursue it. And so when we talk about when is the best time to try something, whether it's social entrepreneurship or business entrepreneurship, the best time is right now. You can do it in high school, right? You don't have to worry about finances, or even in college. Great, this is the best time to do that. Try something on the side. You have way more time than you would ever realize. I know everybody says, oh, I'm so busy. Are you really that busy? What would happen if you, cut out Netflix for 1 week? How much time does that free up? Or games for 1 week? See how much time that frees up for you. How much could you do in that time? So the best time to try it is when you don't have to worry about finances. The next best time to try something is when you have very limited liability. So let's say you've just graduated from college, you might have some college debt to repay, but you don't own a house, or you might own a car, you might have a car payment, but you really have the freedom and flexibility to try all these things now when you are young and you have limited liability. And the older you get, the more difficult it becomes, just because that's the way the world works. And now you've got to make a house payment, or you've got to cover rent. How are you going to do that? What happens when money stops coming in? So even then, kind of when you get to that point, people have romanticized this vision of like Jerry Maguire, where you just kind of quit your job. And you've got this idea and you quit your job and you just walk away. Like, that's a terrible idea. That's really a terrible idea, because it goes back to you've got lots of time. And even if you were working, you have plenty of time, nights and weekends, to start your thing. Cool. And you can keep doing that until this thing gets to a size and a state where now you're able to make the jump without a huge financial risk. So I feel like, some of these questions, I can see them, they're coming from kind of social media, movies, TV shows, where everything's romanticized about entrepreneurship. And I'm like, that's just not true. And a lot of these things are not good ideas. So start young, start in high school. Then if you can't do that, start in college. Great. And if you can't do that, start right after. And even if you have a job, do not quit your job. Use your spare time to really work on this thing, whatever it is, whether it's changing the world socially or building a business. You've got plenty of time, and let them fund you for as long as you can. And only when it's, of a significant size and scale where it can support you, then you can make the leap. But I think you should be a lot more thoughtful about it and Don't buy into the romanticized kind of version of what an entrepreneur does. Let's see here. Let's see. You stated we should not be worried about others, but we need to research that so we are not duplicating efforts so our product brings something different to the plate. I don't think so. I do think you need to kind of see what's out there, but just because someone is doing something doesn't mean they're doing it well or they're really passionate about it. And there's lots of examples of this. So Myspace, which you guys probably never even heard of, was along way before Facebook. And they barely, I mean, they went out of business and they're kind of being reinvented as something else. But Facebook, if Mark Zuckerberg would have taken that approach, he never starts Facebook. There was something that was exactly like Twitter before Twitter. Exactly. And if they looked at that and said, whatever, they never would have started Twitter. So part of it is, yeah, it's out there or whatever, that's fine, you should do your research, but the reality is that doesn't mean there can only be one winner, right? There's plenty of sunshine. So I like the attitude of abundance instead of scarcity. Scarcity is, oh, they've already done it. Even though I'm super passionate about it, I'm not going to pursue it. All right, well, you know what? If that's the case, you could see if they're hiring. Maybe you just want to work there and try that. Or, yeah, I really want to start this. I don't care. I don't like the direction they're taking it, and do it yourself. It all comes back to no regret. You cannot get to the end and have regret. So just ask yourself the question, they're kind of doing it. It's pretty similar to what I was thinking. Would you regret it if you don't do it? If the answer is yes, then you should do it. And that's really, like, I want to simplify decision making for you and think about kind of regret as your driver. Let's see.
Hey, there's a question in the chat that I'm going to read to you really fast.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's asking, how do you think we should find our passion so that our business won't only be about money, rather a business that helps solve problems?
Okay, so how do you figure out what you're passionate about? That's really the question.
Yeah.
And, you know, the answer is you just need to be exposed to lots and lots of different things. And when you find the thing that you can't stop thinking about, whatever that is. So my oldest she'll be graduating from Miami in December. And I said, listen, so this is kind of going into freshman year. So I don't care what your GPA is. That doesn't matter, because you'll make bad choices if it's all about your GPA. You're going to take classes that you know you get an A in. And the honest to God truth is that employers do not care what your GPA is. It is a waste to make decisions based on GPA. So I'm not going to ask about your GPA. I don't care. What I am going to ask is, when you graduate, what classes did you love and you couldn't wait to go to? And what classes did you hate? You're like, oh my God, it's Tuesday. I got to get up and I hate this class. And it's a drag for you. All right, if you can answer those questions when you graduate, what classes did you really liked, and what classes did you hate? That will help inform what are you passionate about. And the more exposure you can get to more different broad topics like that, the more you will really understand what you are passionate about. So be very open. If you're in high school and you're thinking about going to college, you know, think about crazy minors that I want to try that. Take electives that just sound interesting. Don't make decisions about GPA. Look at every club and organization and join them. Not every one of them, but look at the ones that seem most interesting to you and try it out. It's going to broaden your horizons. If you are looking for something to read, I would highly recommend Shoe Dog, which is the Phil Knight book. And he talks about, in the beginning, traveling the world and how it gave him different exposure to different things and different cultures and different ideas. And it led to the birth of Nike. And if you know anything about Steve Jobs, he was the exact same way. The more exposure he can get to more different cultures and ideas and diversity, the more he can see things that other people cannot see. So I really push back on kind of our culture putting students, it's a very tight tunnel they put you in. They don't want you to venture out. It's kind of like a race to get through. I'm like, you're missing the whole point. If you are in college or you are thinking about going to college, you really need to slow down. You really need to be thoughtful about your electives that you're picking and why are you picking them? Have you done an assessment and it says, oh, I really need something that's going to teach me about creativity because I'm not that creative. Great. What classes would do that? What clubs? What organizations? This is all right in front of you to help you get you to where you're going. So I feel like you need to take control of your own future. If you don't know what you're passionate about, it's not really your fault. It is society saying you got to sprint and you got to know what college you're going to go to and what you're going to be. They're like, this is insane. That's not how it should go. And that is why you've got so many people that say, I really don't know what I'm passionate about. I get it. But now is the time to take control. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. Going off of the podcast that you mentioned earlier and the book that you mentioned, I have my own question for you. What resources would you recommend for inspiration, information, education, just any resources that you would recommend to us high school and college students?
Google. Seriously. I mean, you've got it. It really depends on what you're passionate about. So if you are passionate about building a business, Centrifuge is a great resource for you. Getting involved with Centrifuge, and the really nice thing about Cincinnati is that you get access to pretty much anyone, anywhere, and they will talk to you, they will meet with you, they will answer your questions. Most people are super nice. And so if you're just curious, I do this all the time. People come to me and say, hey, I'm really curious about whatever, starting a sports business. And I will hop on a call with them. What's your idea? Let's talk through it. Hey, don't make this mistake. I made that mistake. I want them to be successful. So there's so many resources available to you. You just need to reach out, right? So step one is, what do you care about? So be thoughtful about how you're going to use your high school and college time, and do not give in to society forcing you to go fast and forcing you to think about GPA, because I swear to God, nobody cares about your GPA. Not maybe your parents, but no employer cares about your GPA. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur and start your own thing, GPA is even more irrelevant in that situation. So what do you care about? And then be proactive. How do you learn about that thing? Is it really what you thought it was going to be? How do you use your internships over the summer to learn? What kind of culture do I like? What kind of business? What industry? Be thoughtful. Do not be a lifeguard at the pool. I'm telling you, do not do that. It is not helping you in any way. Other than getting a sweet tan, is not going to help you with being an entrepreneur and figuring out what you like and what you don't like. Use that entire time to be thoughtful. Start with, where do you want to be, and then work backwards. And I always like to start with being truly honest and doing an assessment of, here's who I am and here's where I can improve. And then I think about, how will I get there?
Thank you. It looks like you have one more question in the chat. This might have to be our last question because we're getting close on time here. Okay. And I'll wrap us up after this last question asking, what's your advice for trying to affect change through entrepreneurship in an area that has operated in the same way for ages or is a hard area to break into? For example, the education space in fostering more creativity / divergent thinking.
Yeah, I think the longer they've been doing things the same way, the more opportunity there is for you. So what happens is, so if you think about, I'll go back to Tesla. We've been in gas-powered cars, so internal combustion engines, for 100 years. And there's gas stations everywhere, service stations everywhere. They built this framework and they've insulated themselves, right? This is how we do it. So Elon comes along and says, yeah, but that's not really efficient. Plus, it's not good for the earth. It's not sustainable. And I think I can just make a better car than you. Cool. It is really difficult for him to break in. And it took a lot of energy for him to break in. And it took a lot of time and energy and money, plus legal. You have states that are still fighting Tesla, like Kentucky. You can't have a Tesla dealership in Kentucky because the state won't allow it because they're so old school in how they think. But he doesn't give up. And now he's got superchargers everywhere. Cool. No matter who comes next, right? Porsche created their electric car. All right, but Elon, because he was willing to fight and disrupt something that hadn't been changed in 100 years, he has now established himself in Tesla as this force because they have the supercharging network, they have dealer network, they're probably 5 years ahead of anyone else in terms of engineering, in terms of what they've done. So to answer the question is, the longer they've been doing it the same way, the harder it will be to break in. If you can break in, you will have unbelievable reward for doing that. You will be the one to change whatever they were doing, just like Tesla is benefiting now. So it will be super difficult, but if you can figure out how to persist and problem solve and be creative about how to break in and disrupt that, you'll have the biggest upside. And the key to that is finding the innovators who thinks differently in that space and get to them first. Don't try to change everybody. You need to start with the innovators and then show success. And then people just follow. People are followers. So if you can get people to lead with you, show success, everybody else will follow. So that's the way to do it, as opposed to, oh, I got to change the whole thing all at once. That doesn't work. It's too heavy of a lift.
Okay, it looks
Great
like
questions.
yeah. It looks like we're out of time here. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, Tarek, for inspiring us and sharing your insights with us today. Again, the recorded version of this webinar will be available in the next few days. Please fill out the survey on your way out. It only takes a minute and your feedback is very valuable to us. Tune back tomorrow at 12 for Alice's Wonderland, Discovering Cincinnati's Amazing Startup Ecosystem, Part 2 with Eric Weissman. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks again, Tarek.
Thank you.